4, 3, 2, 1. KenCast.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for a very special KenCast today. We are going to review and look at the classic 1990 movie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie. A lot of you may know this movie, may have seen it. Some of you may have not seen it. But what we're going to do today is take a special critical look at this movie and try to evaluate it both in the time period it came out and how we would see it today. So we look forward to you joining us. Those of you who are joining us live, it's great to see you. We look forward to your live comments. And for those of you who are watching on the replay, just go ahead and leave a comment below the video and we'll all get to read it forever. Now, in order to have this wonderful conversation, this review of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I brought in a special guest today. You have seen him before on KenCast. He's a well-renowned comedian and writer, and he also happens to be an enthusiast and expert on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Rich Baker. Rich, how are you today?
COWAGUNGA, man. I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. Always good to talk to you. And as I said before, this is one of my absolute, before we started this is my absolute favorite movies. Number one. I'm so excited to dive into it with you. Just thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Welcome. And I look forward to learning from you and I'm soaking in your wisdom on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because obviously this is a movie that I have seen at so many different points in my life. And it's just something that's very interesting to reflect upon because the Turtles continue to live on in grand fashion. So this is kind of from the era when they were super popular for the first time. So Rich, let me bring up Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This is the slide. This is the intro slide to the movie. That title comes from the cartoon. That's the same as the cartoon is on the action figures. And I was wondering if you could take us back in time to the beginning of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because what we're going to try to do today, Rich, if you agree and you think we can do this, we're going to try to place ourselves back in 1990 when this movie came out and try to go through what it meant to audiences at the time, what it meant to filmmaking at the time, and how it was received at the time. And I think in order to do that, we have to understand where the Turtles came from and just the context of the 80s, that type of thing. So I was wondering if you could take us back to the beginning of the Ninja Turtles.
Yeah. So TMNT started as a comic book, an indie comic book, right? So you knew DC and Marvel and other, I don't know how many major comic book companies there were, but like this was, very independently made, independently distributed. It was black and white, and it was meant to be a parody of comic books, right? It's like, what ridiculous superhero team, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And it was these guys, Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman, that came up with them. They were two young, kind of struggling artists. And they just like started making each other laugh and drawing these ridiculous drawings. And then eventually like, all right, let's turn this into a comic book. And it was an insanely popular underground comic. But the number of people who read underground comics in 1983 was probably about the same as it is today. Not that big a slice of the population. So it's kind of like did well in the minors, but then how are they going to do in the majors? And as I'm sure you've talked about before, like the 80s was the toy craze mania. That's when everything went up with the toy companies, right? So toy companies were looking for any IP they could to make toys out of. And this was getting, underground comic book. It's successful. So they start a toy line, and then you couldn't have a toy line in the 80s without a cartoon. So they had a cartoon, and lo and behold, it became one of the most successful cartoons ever. And now you've got this franchise that has money. And what's the next big thing? Let's make a movie.
Wow. Okay. So that's an amazing overview of the Ninja Turtles phenomenon. What kind of different phases were there in here? Because my understanding is the comics had a very different tone than, say, the cartoon. And I don't know if the toy came before the cartoon. Of course, I first knew about the Ninja Turtles from the cartoon TV show. But what were these differences in tone, and how did they vary in these different early incarnations?
Yeah, so the comic book was dark. It was gritty. They didn't have the different colored masks and bandanas. It was just they were all red, and that was on purpose. Like, there was part of the fun was that these turtles were almost interchangeable. Like, you didn't know who you were looking at sometimes. And it was dark. I don't remember the comics well enough. I reread them about 6 years ago, but even still, but I remember, it was like, this was gritty. This was not, there's a reason it was independent. Major distributors weren't going to put this out. It was a parody that was also very, it was not quite like Sin City, but like, imagine if Sin City had even more humor in it, kind of tone. And so the toy makers, they were like, well, we can't take it exactly, but we like the general concept, right? So they basically toned it down to a kid's toy. What could be. So we got the different colors, of course, like multicolor things, and make it nice and easy. Okay, Donatello is purple, has a staff. It's like, kids, you're like, oh, okay, I get the difference between there and that. And then the movie, what it did so brilliantly, and I think it did a lot of things brilliantly, but it really melded the two worlds together. So it was accessible to children, but it wasn't a kids movie. But it wasn't so dark that it was too removed. And it was this wonderful hybrid of the two. Cause I liked both. I was a huge fan of the cartoon, just like you were. And I'd known some of the comics. I hadn't read like all of them, but I had an older brother. So I got to kind of clued into some stuff that was a little older than my age. But the movie really struck a tone that it's still my favorite iteration of the Turtles to this day.
Yeah, and I remember that time very well. And one thing that, and this came out, and we'll go through some vital stats on this movie. Okay, so this movie came out on March 30th, 1990. Okay.
Yeah.
This is the March after the release of the Batman phenomenon. That's the original Batman starring Michael Keaton, the Tim Burton just phenomenon. And for me, I don't know how you feel about this. I remember being young at the time. And what I loved about that first Batman is that all the incarnations that we'd seen, whether in comics or, in cartoons or the 60s campy Batman TV series, it was all very light and cartoony, very kiddie. Then along comes the Tim Burton Batman movie. And it's almost like, for us kids, we took it so seriously. Batman was this high stakes life and death superhero in our brains. And we finally saw that it was adult. It was violent. It was scary. And I think that's why kids loved that Batman. It was so edgy. It was almost forbidden. And this movie, I don't know whether intentionally or unintentionally, came out really, it seems like at the perfect time, like on the coattails of Batman. It's almost like what you're saying. It did the kind of a similar thing.
100%. Do you remember how old you were when this movie came out?
I think I was 9.
Okay, yeah, I was 8, right? So we're both pretty much the same age there. And so when Batman came out, and I love Batman. I mean, great movie, one of the best of all time, absolutely. When it came out, it was the first time I really felt that something that felt like it kind of belonged to me, even though Batman was way older than our generation, but he still felt like mine because I read Batman comics and I watched the Batman thing. And so he kind of felt like, oh, this is like one of my guys. And so when they put him on the screen, and it was just like, whoa, I absolutely loved it. And I had not read the Frank Miller Batman stuff that was the darker stuff, that had come out before then. So he was like, as an 8-year-old, it felt like I got to look into like an adult version of a character who felt so close to me. Right. Yeah. And it was the same with the Turtles, right? This, like, they curse, they say damn,
right?
Like it's a little more adult.
I know. It's so funny watching this again. You see the cursing, and as a kid, you're like, "Oh, you said a bad word," and they say it with such conviction, even though it's like the most minor of curse words. It just it has that impact,
Yeah, make it just a little edgy, right? But I think that so the Batman came out and it was great, and then to me this felt like, okay, this is the new, like, someone set the bar pretty high with Batman. And to me, the Turtles, no, they were both filmed during the same time, so it's not like the filmmakers got to see anything or know about Batman to help influence them. But I think they both knocked it out of the park so well that like these two movies really set this idea of like we can take children's characters and put them at a high level that can appeal to a lot of different ages and a lot of different types of people.
Yeah, very, very well said. And so we're heading into March. Did you have this anticipation? Was this on your radar from the first notices, or did this kind of surprise you that they were making a Ninja Turtles movie?
No surprise. I was psyched.
Okay.
I remember. Do you remember like the Pizza Hut commercials that would like tease it and all that kind of
Right.
stuff? And you know, of
Yes.
course, you saw those when you're watching the cartoons. So it's like if you were already a fan, they knew exactly where to advertise for it. And it was like every kid was like, "Mom, we're going to the movies."
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you make a great point. You saw these during the cartoons. Of course, this is a live action. They made a decision to make a live action movie, which seems like a
Yeah.
challenge. When you were a kid, did you have any qualms about that, or did that excite you that this was going to be a live action movie, or did you buy that?
I'd love to have such a good memory that I could tell you exactly my mindset. You know, like me now definitely remembers being screwed by the He-Man movie, right? Like
Right. Yes.
He-Man was
Yes.
my guy. I loved his cartoons, you know, at that age. And then they made this movie and it was garbage. And so, you know, was I aware enough to bridge that gap and kind of like go, I hope they don't screw this up? It's possible. It's possible. But I also just remember being so Turtle Mania, Turtle Fever at the time that I probably didn't care. I would have just, you know, it was like Bart Simpson of like Krusty, just like whatever you slap a turtle on, I'm buying it. Like, let's bring it on.
Absolutely. Well, that's
Were
great.
you at like, did you have a sense of what was coming?
I think I was so into the Ninja Turtles at this point that
Yeah.
I was just rapidly eating up any sort of Turtles content. And the idea that this was live action made me super excited. And I think I saw the name Jim Henson being thrown around. And so I had good connotations with the name Jim Henson. So I was
Sure.
I was excited. It seemed like this was going to be a quality thing. I remember some other people, I don't know, maybe adults or something, like kind of going, I don't know, this is going to be good or bad. I seem to remember maybe on the news or something, people debating about whether this was actually going to be successful or not, which is kind of weird to look at in hindsight. But, you know, of course, no one knew. I guess it was a big gamble. And we'll be getting into that soon. I want to say a quick hello to everyone watching. General Obvious, good to see you. I didn't grow up with the 1990 TMNT movie, but it's one of my favorites, along with the second film. That's right, because this spawned a whole franchise.
Yeah, trilogy, yeah.
Yes. Now we have a question. Cobra Kai Underground asks, what is TMNT, DC or Marvel, or is it its own thing? Well, Rich, I think now it's owned by Nickelodeon.
I believe that's correct. And they clearly had some ability to cross over with DC because there is a wonderful movie, if you're a TMNT fan, that came out a few years ago, Batman versus the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And it's chef's kiss. But
Wow.
At the time, the original comics, as I said, they were independent. It was called Mirage Studios. And so because of the success of the Turtles, they kind of were their own. They didn't have to be part of Marvel or DC. They were kind of their own thing. They had enough money to kind of run their own thing for a while. So I don't know when or they sold or merged or whatever, but they started original.
Very interesting. Lisa Barrett says hi. Sebastian, Nerd World, MOTU Thunder, great to see you. William Sprong, great to see you. Clifford, thank you for being a channel member, Clifford. That's wonderful. And Jan says, yeah, this brings back so many memories of my childhood. Love this film. Good to see you, Ben. Good to see you, Auntie P. Paula, I think. Good to see you. Guys, thank you for your comments. We will work in your comments as we work through this movie. So, Rich, let me start off by just going over some basics of this movie, just in case someone's watching or listening that hasn't seen it, so they'll have a bit of context. The synopsis of this movie is 4 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles emerge from the shadows to protect New York City from a gang of criminal ninjas. That could probably be the synopsis of many comics or episodes or movies. It stars, it was directed by Steve Barron, and he was known for directing music videos at the time, like Billie Jean and Take on Me. And he also directed Coneheads, 1993 big screen version of the Saturday Night Live skit, and a few others. It stars Judith Hoag as April O'Neil. The only time we saw Judith Hoag as April O'Neil. Elias Koteas.
Yeah, that's according to Google. I don't have firsthand info.
He plays Casey Jones, a very interesting character in this movie, and we even have a very young Sam Rockwell as a thug. So this has to be one of his first film roles. It's great. Voice cast includes Corey Feldman as Donatello, Robbie Rist as Michelangelo, Josh Pais as Raphael, Brian Tochi as Leonardo, and Kevin Clash, Elmo, as Splinter, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
The movie runtime is an hour and 35 minutes. The budget is $13.5 million. It was in theaters for 9 months and grossed $202 million worldwide, which is stunning. I think if in today's money, that would probably be somewhere around $600 million worldwide, which is huge.
Yeah, they did really well on that investment, and it was it actually broke the record for biggest. And it's kind of funny the same way that comic was an independent comic. This was an independent movie. This wasn't tied to a major studio, and so it broke the record for biggest biggest box office weekend and total for independent movie, and it would hold that until '99 when Blair Witch finally broke it.
That is so fascinating because we're so used to the New Line Cinema logo, which appears at the beginning of this movie. But you're saying it was actually an independent movie.
Yeah, it was. And I'm not the expert to know exactly what all that means, but it was not independently. Because New Line Cinema, they distributed it, but they didn't create it, right? Golden Harvest is the one who produced it, and they looked forever to find a distributor until finally New Line Cinema agreed to it.
That's so amazing that they had any trouble getting a distributor. It seems like it would be a slam dunk, but I guess it wasn't.
Well, that's Hollywood, right? And it's like you go, look, we've got a movie based on the most popular children's franchise of all time that is at the height of its popularity. And, Disney and Warner Brothers, like, pass.
Right.
You're like, cool.
You're right. That is a very common story in Hollywood. That's a really good point. Alan Stavros, a very old friend of mine, is joining us and says, Ken, did Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles inspire you in your original aspirations in martial arts? I think it coincided with that interest, Al, but actually it was the Karate Kid, those movies, that made me really interested in martial arts. But this is, and we'll get back to this, Rich, I think just an incredible martial arts movie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for kids. Yeah. Just absolutely incredible. So, okay, let's dive into this, Rich. From the opening frame, I know you've seen this so many times. From the opening frame, you've got that opening sequence where April O'Neil is narrating this crime wave problem across the city. And you have kind of a montage of all these things happening. You have teases of the Foot Clan. What did this do to you kind of watching this as a kid? What did you think of it? The tone, the approach, the way they tease things. What are your thoughts on that?
I love this question. I was very familiar with New York and movies. I'd never been there at this point in my life, but I'd seen it in like Crocodile Dundee and other things like that. And the way that I wouldn't have put it in words at the time, but what I see now is they really do a great job of making New York a major character in this film. It's not just any city. It's like the Turtles are tied to New York for a reason, and the way that they show the different types of people as they're getting robbed, the April, who's the hard-hitting New York reporter, and then the chief of police, who's like this kind of gruff guy or whatever. And it's like it really sets a tone that this is not the cartoon. And I mean, that's literally the tagline. It's, this is hey, dude, this is no cartoon. And they tell you in that first thing, like, this is kind of a gritty, almost noir. There it is. Yeah. Hey, dude, it's not great. It's kind of a noir film, and it feels New York, and it feels gritty.
Right. And I know I appreciated that. I know we talked about that a little before, but the idea that this was a more adult version, that this
Yeah.
the stakes seemed real. It was
Yeah.
very gritty. Even now, I really admire, I think, even from this opening sequence, just how it's shot. I love the cinematography in this movie. It was just so, I don't know how to put it. You could say it was kind of artsy in a way, but it just felt very gritty, raw, and real for such a fantastical subject.
It felt to me, I like all that you're saying. The way I put it is, it felt to me like Steve Barron was trying to also not only do a love letter to the fans of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but also do a love letter to people who loved 70s cinema. Like this felt like, like kind of like a Taxi Driver kind of
Mm,
thing, or like And Justice for All, or those kinds of like more gritty, real, like grounded movies. Like this felt like that could have fit in there.
right. And one thing I really appreciated how Steve Barron approached this was he kept teasing things. Like I really enjoyed how like everything was teased until we got an amazing reveal. And it's
Yeah.
I don't know if they understood how popular the Turtles were while they were making this, but it's almost like they knew that they had these stars that people were going to be waiting to see these characters, and they kept teasing and holding back. And one of those examples, I think, is that kind of near the opening after that, you see April leaving, going out to an alley. She sees a rat, and then she runs into a bunch of thugs that are tied to the Foot Clan. And then Raphael comes to the rescue. When you got the slow motion sigh knocking out the light, and you just hear him fight.
Yeah.
You just hear him in the darkness, and you
Yeah.
know, oh, it's a turtle. And then you see that just that little bit of him, in the sewer. Like, what did this do? I mean, at the time,
Whew.
just as a kid, but like this approach where it's just teasing, where they're not giving it to you yet. How effective do you think that is?
It was great. It was because even though, there's no surprise that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are in this movie, what the surprise is, we've never seen live action version before. And so like we don't know what they're gonna look like. We saw it a little bit in the trailer, but they did a really good job in this movie of like when you finally see them, you like, oh, it's a big reveal, and you're kind of wondering what they're like. And also it goes again to this noir, gritty, dark. The first scene happens in the dark. It's very similar to Jaws. You don't see the shark at first. You just see the effects of it, right? You just hear these sound effects. And then when she picks up the sigh, there's some of that like just picking it up of like this cartoonish like weapon that's actually real being held by someone who doesn't know how to hold it. And then what's the first word you hear? Damn.
Damn. Right. Exactly.
The first word you hear out of these childhood megastars is damn. And I was just like, ah.
I know. I don't know about you, but this was the age where on the schoolyard, it's like a lot of us discovered swearing,
Oh,
and just third grade, fourth grade, that type of thing, and just the expletive just flowed because it's like a whole new world, and you figure you can use all these. I mean, sorry, parents who are watching this, but yeah, there's just that age where you discover all of these curse words, and then to hear Raphael, you're like, yeah, that's great.
yeah. No, it's great.
So it goes right into the opening sequence.
Mhm.
We have the opening titles, and then we have the reveal of the Ninja Turtles in the sewer.
Yeah.
This is where we see them in their suit for the very first time.
Yep.
So
And we hear
Rich,
that dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, right? It's that music has nothing to do
yes,
with the cartoon. It's this the music was really well done. I'm not remembering the guy's name offhand, but I'll look it up in a second. But it's
John
the
Duprez.
music. Johnny Press, yes, thank you. His whole score is it hits you right here, and it keeps going, and it's really brilliant.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. I'm glad you brought that up. He had done a lot of work with Monty Python, like he did Meaning of Life, he did Life of Brian, he did the score for A Fish Called Wanda, he did the score for UHF, Weird Al Yankovic's movie, and it's a very interesting score because it's like he has that upbeat main Turtles theme, which is fun, and you have that kind of synth sound. But then he also leans into like the rock distortion guitar, especially
Yeah.
around Shredder, and it's this he seems to run the gamut between very light and happy and uplifting, and kind of really dark and grungy. And
Yeah,
I assume you had the soundtrack as a kid.
100%. Yeah, no, I wore that tape out. I listened to it over and over and over and over again. Yeah, did you?
Yes, I did too. Do you remember? Do you have a favorite section or score from the score from the movie?
Yeah, I think the final fight scene with Shredder, obviously, like it's just so, like it's dark and it's just like it's ominous and it's kind of perfect, like how the music goes with a lot of the fighting and as it happens. I think it's just a really well done sequence. What about you?
Yeah, I think my personal favorite was the Shredder's Suite. I think that's what it was called, where you
Mm,
have that introduction of the Shredder. Because as a
yeah,
kid, uh, I love the Shredder as a villain,
sure.
and Steve Barron and the filmmakers, they tease the Shredder for quite a bit, and they tease him as almost this Darth Vader-esque villain. You don't see
Yeah,
him; you kind of see him in silhouette, and then when you see him, he's like walking down this long hallway, and you just have like almost like the drums in the distance, and
yeah.
it's like really builds him up. And you have that Shredder suite that he just comes in with the guitar, and he's just, you see him from the back and he turns, and you're like blinded by that glint off his helmet. And I just love the music there. I love that entire sequence. It was just such a brilliant cinematic way to introduce what had really been a cartoon character. I mean, he just seemed
Yeah.
real bad and dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. And it starts with a speech. Like the first, you'd think Shredder, you'd start with a fight or something. Nope. Starts with a speech. Cool. Like a calm speech. Anyway,
Yeah,
we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But yeah,
it,
I love it.
it happens. It happens, Rich. We can't help ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just
But
enthusiastic.
we are now. Okay, so looking back at this, and you could, I don't know, from a realistic critical eye, when you have those turtles jumping out for the first time, we have that reveal of them. What do you think of those costumes, those suits? Did they work? Do they work? Do they hold up?
I think a million percent they work. I think they are the absolute best version of live action Ninja Turtles ever that I've ever seen. And I hope at some point someone can come up with better ones, not because those aren't good, but just because so that we can still heighten. But I'm fine with those being the best because like that's Jim Henson working on a budget, but they're so expressive. And what matters to the turtles isn't just their fighting, which is, again, we'll talk about the fighting sequences are perfect, but the expressions on their faces. We could talk about so many little moments where you feel such empathy for these turtles, right? And that's those costumes. I know they were hell to film in for the people who actually had to be in there, but man, I'm so glad they did.
Right. And you mentioned like the best incarnation, because we had costumes also worked on by Jim Henson in the second one, and then another company did the third one, and then I think after that they've always been CG, pretty
Mm.
much. And so, what was it about this first set, do you think, that really nailed it?
It's they there's enough puppetry in there that you can tell they're not real, but there's so much detail in there that you suspend your belief without much effort, right? Like there's little liver spots on the turtles, and there's little scars and stuff from battle wounds, and they very much look lived in, right? They look, like their height and their weight and their disproportion, like compare, they're acting with people in almost every scene, and it looks like, okay, this is probably what it would look like if these things were actually walking around the real world.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciated how each one, there were just such minute differences between the different turtles.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong if I'm remembering right. Further incarnations of this, I think they tended to look kind of samey. But in this
Mhm.
one, they all, like, the shapes of their heads are slightly different, and it's really great. I'm wondering, and I can't answer this, but kids today, would they be so used to seeing, say, CG incarnations of the turtles, would they kind of dismiss outright, do you think, these kinds of low tech, old school suits? Or do you think that's something that kids or younger people would actually buy?
I would like to believe that in the same way we can respect, like, brass instruments that were invented 400 years ago that are just still classic and good, that hold it like a good saxophone or what, a trumpet or whatever, like that kids today can still watch. But I don't know what it's like to be a kid, but in modern day, but they're so good. They look good. Like they don't look wonky. Like I'm not making a big leap when I rewatch it to go, oh, it's kind of weird, but I'll forgive it. Like I don't feel like I have to do that.
Right. And actually, I'll bring up here's a picture of Jim Henson.
Nice.
And in that set, in the sewer set for the opening sequence, kind of with his creation, pretty cool stuff.
And as you can see, the four faces are individual. Like they're all turtles, but like their muscles are a little different. Their faces are a little different. Like these were crafted with love. They weren't just mass produced.
Right. Which is so fascinating because, you were telling us that this is an independent movie. And it's just so fascinating that they got Jim Henson on board, even though this movie didn't have a distributor. I guess they had enough of a budget, or maybe the project was so intriguing to Jim Henson that he did it. And I think, man, how lucky we were. I mean, he was a very singular genius in terms of coming up with this stuff. And Ninja Turtles 3, I think you can look at that movie and see that another company did that, and it's just not as good.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this was his last movie before he died.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think this came out, and he died just a few months after. So
yeah.
And then they dedicated the second movie to him. So
nice.
That's it was sad. Still is sad.
Very much so.
Hey, Emmett, how you doing? Thanks for watching today. General Obvious says, it's funny how Karate Kid 3 and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are only a year apart. Karate Kid 3 feels so 80s, while TMNT feels so 90s. It is fascinating, Rich, because you brought up the idea that Ninja Turtles, the way Steve Barron was approaching this, was very reminiscent of 70s cinema. And then you had it's almost, I don't know what the cheesiness of the 80s was, maybe kind of going away a bit. Like, not saying some of this movie wasn't cheesy, but it did seem like it was kind of beyond the 80s.
Well, the 80s movies to me feel very glossy and perfect, right? Like even Karate Kid, which I love, a little gritty, but it's very it's very clean edges, right? Whereas this movie, I think part of the reason it might feel 90s is because I think it influenced a lot of the 90s. I think a lot of producers and filmmakers said that movie made a lot of money, figure out something from there that helps us make a lot of money, and rightfully as it should, just like Batman or any other movie. But I don't know. It feels, I think it might feel 90s because it set trends.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And then Jan says Golden Harvest was well known for low budget films in Hong Kong. As Rich was talking about, all the best Kung Fu films were distributed by Golden Harvest. And maybe we're very fortunate that Golden Harvest did this because they had no reservations about putting in tons of fight scenes, which, we see, throughout this movie. And we'll get to that. But thank you so much, Jan, for your comment.
Yeah.
And then Alan says, I highly recommend on Netflix watching TMNT, The Toys That Made Us episode. I haven't seen that, and how it all evolved. It's a great documentary. Have you seen that, Rich?
Yeah, it's great. Highly recommend it. Agreed. Nice, in fact, that whole series, The Toys That Made Us, The Movies That Made Us, both really great.
Yeah, it's I'll have to check that out. I'd be so curious to see the backstory to all of this. So Rich, we kind of talked about the suits and the setup. This movie also deals with a number of interesting themes, anger, family, loss of family members, what makes a real family. And I think those themes kind of make for the more, quote, touching parts of this movie. But did you feel that those things were, I don't know, appropriate for this movie, or did they fit in, especially regarding the target audience?
To me, a good story starts with the main character and then folds out from there. And it's like, so your main character, there's 4 teenage turtles that and I love where it started. It didn't start with their very first origin, but it also wasn't super far into it. It was like literally the opening fight scene they say was their first battle. So all they'd done was train up until that point. So we saw them in a really, really fun time. But and I lost, what the heck was your question? I'm so sorry.
Oh, like those right, those themes, of anger and loss of family. How did those integrate?
Well, you got these teenagers who are coming of age, right? And so who are the bad guys? The people who are manipulating teenagers who are coming of age. The Shredder is basically like this surrogate father figure. That's what he calls himself. I'm your father, right? It's literally Darth Vader now that I think about Star Wars. But it's like But anyway, he's taking all these kids who have troubled homes or rebellious or whatever, and he manipulates them for his own use. And then you've got the opposite, which is Splinter, who goes out of his way. He doesn't have to raise these turtles, but he does so that he can help them be better and help make society better. And so you've got these two, because the main characters of the Turtles, but I would say like Splinter and Shredder are the arc of the whole thing, and they're polar opposites in what they do, even though they do the same thing for different reasons.
Right. And you bring up kind of the backstory. What did you think of those flashback sequences, that super gritty, like puppet sequences that give the backstory of the Turtles and also the Shredder?
Yeah, right. It's again, even though one was not influenced by the other, very similar to Batman, right? It's like we don't get his backstory till a little bit later in flashbacks. And I thought it was a really, if you were taking your kids to see this and you didn't watch the cartoons, or if you were just whoever and didn't watch the cartoons, this gave you everything you needed to know. And so it was helping the people who weren't fans, and it was also a little fan service of like, yeah, we know where we came from too, and this is the story you like.
Right. And then we have some comments about Shredder and his Foot Clan. Clifford says, when the Foot Clan emptied out the loaded truck in a matter of seconds, blew me out of my chair. Totally agree with that. And then Dude says, that skateboard ramp in the arcade area of the Foot's headquarters still blows my mind. I wish someone would recreate that whole area. Well, Rich, as we're kind of getting into this movie, we see this warehouse, we see Shredder's base of operations. And as a kid, I was just so entranced by this idea. It's like you could have anything you want. Looking back on it, it's very reminiscent of Pinocchio's Pleasure Island, where they get all these like young boys to go and they get to do all these things they're not supposed to do. In this movie, the first shot, you see that kid chomping a cigar, playing pool, and, they're skateboarding, they're smoking, they're playing poker, doing everything they shouldn't do. And they can have anything they want as long as they go out and steal it. And what did you think of this? As a kid watching this, did you want to join in this world? Would you be tempted to take part in this?
I wouldn't have, no, because I was just one of those like super straight-laced kids that like smoking, that. But I love, from a storyteller's point of view, even as a kid, I recognize like that same thing about like with what's his name? But the Peter Pan, the idea that like, this is how he manipulates. He gets them addicted. It's just like, the basic drug dealer, right? Get addicted to the good stuff, and then we bring you into the harder stuff, and then you're in this cult that you have no chance of getting out of.
Right.
Did you want to go to this place and skateboard and stuff?
I think I love the idea of being able to do like that was kind of attractive to me as a kid. It's like, oh, there are no rules. Is there a place like this where you can kind of do what you want? Now, seriously, I never thought of doing it, but I think there is that allure is there. Like I could understand why kids, the fantasy of it. And I can understand why kids would want to do that. But you're right. You kind of know that it's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. And, but even in that sequence, you're right. You go to the next level and you have the introduction of Master Tatsu, right? And he is kind of walking through and going to the next level where the older kids, are being trained, and they're being trained to be lethal fighters. And I don't know, what do you think of this entire sequence? Because you see these different levels of indoctrination, I guess you could say, in a short span, and you have this character of Master Tatsu.
You know, and he wasn't from the cartoons, and if he was from the comics, I didn't remember him at all. So, like, he was brand new to me. So I didn't know. But I mean, he's very scary. Obviously, he's trying to, portray the scary guy, and so when this kid runs into him, you're teased. It's getting. He said this director's really good at teasing of, like, you think, oh man, this kid's about to get his face knocked off or something, and he just goes, "Go play," and you're like, oh, and then. Moments later, you see Tatsu kick a kid in the face, bowing to him. So
Right, exactly. So it's like you can't trust him, and that part always reminded me of in the original Karate Kid when Mr. Miyagi was saying, when Daniel was bowing and he looked down, he like slapped Daniel and said, "Always look eye," which is kind of similar to what Master Tatsu said: is never lower your eyes to an enemy.
Yeah.
And I'll just, if we're talking about that, let me bring this up because here's another Karate Kid connection. Pat Johnson, who was the stunt coordinator for the Karate Kid movies, he was also the stunt coordinator for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1 and 2. And so there's also that connection. And I don't know what you think, Rich, but I think he really outdid himself in this movie.
Oh man, I mean, if you want to talk about the fight sequence, we can talk about that all day. About how I still think they're better than almost any modern day fight sequence I see in any movie. Like the way he trained, and in that same picture, Ernie Reyes Jr., who's playing Donatello in the suit. He's not his voice. He would play Kino in the Secret of the Ooze. So it was like an interesting little promotion he got.
Right, exactly. And then he was in other things. Wasn't he? He was in Surf Ninjas and like other
Ninjas. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. 100%.
Well, so let's talk about these fight sequences because I'm going to make a statement here, and those of you in the comments, Rich, you can disagree with me. I think for any PG movie ever made, this has the highest quality and the highest amount of martial arts fighting and choreography like in movie history.
I never thought about that, about the rating, but yeah, I'm sure you're right. 100%.
Yeah, it's like, and I think this was the last time that this happened. There was a lot of artistry, I think, and and skill in the martial arts sequences. If you look at this movie, I think that just the choreography is wonderful. There are always gags, so it's something there's always humor. There was a lot of thought and variety put into all of these fight sequences, and there are just so many of them that as a kid, I know I lapped it up, but then. I guess we can talk about the parents and their complaints later, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on all of these fight sequences?
I think they're brilliant. I think that fight sequences to action movies are similar to songs and musicals. Like, it's cool if they're pretty, but they better forward the plot or else I don't care. And I think all these fight sequences make perfect sense where they are. I think they heighten the story. And from a shooting point of view, man, just thank God for Golden Harvest, because like wide shots, stunts, not Born Identity, I'm dizzy, so many cuts, Transformers, I don't even know what's happening, kind of. It's like, no, we're going to train the people to do the cool stuff and we're just going to shoot it.
Right. Yeah. I know, that's such a great point, because it wasn't too much after this that you're right, that became a very common thing, just like tight, shaky shots, no master shots of these things. You really many times can't appreciate the skill of the people involved. And this, you always knew what was going on. You had a sense of space. Just really wonderful fight sequences, and really, I think, inventive shots, like iconic things. Like, I don't know if they were thinking this when they were making it, but when they lay down Michelangelo, he's down and he's like spinning, but you have that overhead shot. But the vision, the image of a life-size turtle like spinning like that, it's such a unique, iconic image that had never been seen before. And I don't know, I always loved how they did these fight sequences.
Oh, I love it. And we took a break in the fight sequence for a nunchuck battle.
Right. Like, yes.
I mean,
a fellow chucker, eh?
It doesn't make like logical sense, but in the narrative of the film, I still don't even question it. I'm like, of course we're going to do this right now. This makes perfect sense. Of course, everyone stop fighting. Watch these two go at it.
Right. And so, and we've got to talk about humor, because there's humor all throughout these fight scenes, but also throughout the whole movie. Like lots of
Yes.
gags all the time. Obviously, Michelangelo is really funny. You're a comedian. Give us your perspective on the humor in this film, how difficult it may have been to execute that humor, given the costumes, constraints, that type of thing, and how the humor helps the movie.
I mean, I know every line of this movie. There's not a single moment in this movie where it feels like the movie's saying, here's a joke. It's never pushing it. The characters are just being earnest and honest, and that has always been my favorite type of humor. It always will be. And so when, the Ninja Turtles are in April's apartment watching, an old cartoon of the tortoise and the hare, and he's like, and he's cheering him on, he's like, ninja kick the damn rabbit, do something. It's like, that's not a joke. That's just him being angry. And like, and that's why it's good humor.
Right. That's really great. And following up on your comment on the nunchucks, Josh says, I wish Tom Cole would use nunchucks like Michelangelo in Cobra Kai season 6. Great tribute. That's so funny. Well, it's really interesting because the Turtles themselves really popularized, of course, to an entire generation, what these weapons were. Nunchucks.
Oh, yeah.
Katana blade, bow, and sai. And we really got some amazing examples of them using these weapons in real life. And I know that seems like a small thing, but to a kid, that is huge, to actually see real people or turtles using real weapons in these fight scenes.
Yeah. And this is skipping way too far ahead, but just like you've got 2 sais and 2 katanas, but there's only one actual moment in the entire movie where anyone gets cut. And it's in the very final fight scene. So it's like, you're talking about PG in the action sequence. It's like, what a brilliant way to make us still feel like they're using these weapons to their full extent, but not actually having to slice someone's head off or do anything crazy like that.
Right. It's almost like you can appreciate the skill, the artistry of the fights, and you don't have to worry about gore at all. Yeah, it's a really great balance. Tig Terry Silver Rocks, who is a champion member of this channel, thank you for joining us today. Not only is she a champion on the channel, she's a champion in real life. And I want to say thank you because she is an executive producer of this KenCast right now. So thank you so much, Tig Terry Silver Rocks. So obviously the Turtles get into trouble, and there's the sequence where the Foot Clan burns down. They pretty much ruin April O'Neil's pad, and then they have to go out to the country. And we have this interesting sequence that's away from the city, where they have to go out and find themselves again. And tell us your thoughts on this sequence, Rich. What do you think story-wise is trying to accomplish, and does it work?
It's the I always forget the guy's name, but the hero's journey guy, right? Him.
Yes, Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell, right? He talks about going into the cave, right? And to me, the farmhouse is very much the cave. As a kid, I just remember I was just excited about wherever the movie wanted to take me, so I didn't care. But the farmhouse did feel kind of random. But what I didn't remember, and I don't know, again, I don't remember how many of the comics I read before watching the movie, but rereading the comics, this whole sequence is almost taken verbatim from the comics.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so it was just another nod of the screenwriter and directors of saying no, we understand both worlds. We're giving you both. We got you, kind of thing. But as far as a story, you're seeing Raphael just sitting in a tub, coma. He's in a coma, basically, right? They don't say that, but he is. And then you've got Donatello and Casey Jones kind of having their thing, and then Leonardo's just sad all the time and wanting Splinter back, and then you've got the Casey Jones April kind of sexual tension happening. I don't know, there was no action in it, but it didn't bother me. I just love these characters, were so earnest, and I cared about them, and I wanted to see what was next.
Right. And you had April through voiceover kind of pushing the story along, and she's drawing illustrations of the different turtles, and it's an interesting sequence because there are some interesting vignettes, but looking back on it, I noticed that we don't see her talking about Michelangelo. We don't see her talking about Raphael. And then she talks about Casey Jones, and she's all, kind of happy or whatever. but it's almost like she's drawing him, but it doesn't show that she's drawn him. And so I was wondering during this sequence if there was material that was potentially cut out. And I don't know. And there are some other things too, like with the HD versions now, you can see that it's Michelangelo who's standing on the roof and yelling Splinter. You can see his nunchucks, but it sounds like Raphael.
It does sound like Raphael, yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting, I wonder if there was some story that would have put Michelangelo there, like he was going through some trouble during that time. But I don't know if you remember in the comics, I'm wondering if the comics kind of maybe give some clue as to maybe what they were doing.
They probably do. I should reread them again. I've forgotten so much at this point. But yeah, it's funny. I've never thought to look up and see any like deleted footage or anything like that. Like, I don't know if there's scenes out there that they shot or anything in a script that they didn't do. Yeah, be curious about that.
I know a little bit. I know that there was a lot of editing that was done. Like there were multiple cuts. I think Steve Barron had his cut, and then the studio came and they completely did a recut, made it shorter. And I think the final edit is really great. I think it's fantastic. Sure. Although I am wondering, could there be a PG-13 or R-rated, like a more adult version kind of in there that, we don't have that footage right now, but if they put the footage back in, if they maybe emphasize different things, maybe if there's more violence, on-screen violence, that type of thing, I'm wondering if there's a more adult version of this movie.
God, if there was, I would love to see it. Yeah. Now I'm going to go on a little fact-finding mission later this weekend, apparently. Well, by the way, someone, Matt Moore said, I love Casey Jones chopping vegetables with Leo's katana. That is, again, what a great joke. That isn't like a joke. They rush to this farmhouse. There's probably not a lot of tools and stuff. And so he's like, yeah, use the katana. Why not? And it's just such a throwaway, but like, what a lovely memory that we still think about. Thanks for that, man.
Absolutely. And Jan says, I love that scene with Leonardo and Raphael when they make up and hug. Very, very touching. Dude says farmhouse sequence is beautiful. The whole thing is epic. Yeah. And yeah, Rich, I think we can see it's just people who watched this movie really enjoyed that sequence. It was like a very important character building sequence. And I don't know if that would exist nowadays. Like if you had like a kid, I don't know, cartoon based movie like this, would they take the time to have this character building section, like with no fighting, away from the villains? I don't know. It feels very unique.
I gotta say, again, it definitely feels kind of like that independent cinema, right? Of like, we're gonna go to this farmhouse, and part of the reason why it was cheap to shoot that farmhouse. But yeah, it's a beautiful sequence. It's just, and if you were to put me in the mindset of someone in 1988 hearing a pitch and be like, and then we're gonna have this whole sequence, we're gonna go to the farm, I'd be like, no. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are in New York. Don't take them out of New York, right? I'd be that idiot who would have, let this gem go away.
Right. We've had some comments talk about Casey Jones. You've mentioned Casey Jones. You've mentioned the sexual tension between April O'Neil and Casey Jones. What do you think of that? What do you think of their relationship? There's that scene, I think, that like my sisters and I kind of kept on looking at suspiciously, like where he's like rubbing her shoulders and like, what's going on here? I think as a kid, you're like, oh, something's going on here that I don't quite understand yet. And what did you think of that whole relationship? Did they do enough with it? Did they do too much with it? Did it work?
I thought it worked because it was, they had an antagonistic flirtation ship up until the very end, right? And then the kiss. So, to me, as a kid, I didn't know anything about, like, every movie had a love story, so it was all just, par for the course. I don't think it was necessary, but I didn't have a problem with it. Like, yeah, I don't know. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it worked. I think as a kid, I was kind of like, that was the part for me that I thought it was interesting when they were fighting, but the whole like, well, I think like the shoulder rub and then the kiss at the end, like I think I was at the age where I still thought it was gross. Like I didn't quite get it. Like I felt like, it's kind of getting in the way of the good stuff. But I think I appreciate that more now.
Yeah, you were
For sure.
Fred Savage in the like, oh, the kissing part. Oh, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Nice.
So okay, so they're at the farm. They really have this amazing campfire, I guess, meditation.
Meditation. Yeah.
So this looks like a big message, a big part of the movie in the turtles' lives where they realize their final lesson from Splinter. They're worried about him. Um, t- Tell me about this sequence. How does this
I
sequence
mean,
hit for you?
I still cry every time. Like,
Mhm.
unapologetically. Cried as a kid when I saw it in the theaters for the first, second, third, and fourth time, and I cry every time since. Uh, it's powerful. Like, obviously, I was so stupid as a kid, like not stupid, just ignorant. Like that. I'm like, meditation can do that. I'm watching a movie about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles talking to a rat, and I'm like, but that part's real, right? The meditation. So but yeah, I mean, it's such a cool effect. It comes out of the fire and they're all around, and it's such a uniting moment because they lost Splinter, they lost Raphael, now Raph's back, and now Splinter's like, and they really make it seem like he might not survive, and like you wonder, because the movie has so many surprises from what you thought you knew about the Ninja Turtles, that I'm like, they could kill Splinter. Like, I didn't think they were going to, but they made me feel like it was possible.
Right, right. And I know, I think they did a great job where we all were afraid that something might happen to Splinter. And
Yeah.
what do you think it is about Splinter in this movie? Because you're right, I still well up a bit when I have these Splinter scenes, especially when Splinter, he's obviously very loving towards the turtles who he's taken care of. Also, he says very touching things to Danny, as Danny is trying to find his way. And what is it about Splinter that you think is so touching in this movie?
He is the dad that everyone wishes they had. Like, maybe if you had a good dad, that's cool. Me and my dad had a pretty harsh relationship, but like, no matter how good your dad was, he probably wasn't as good as Splinter. Like, if you did, congratulations, you're probably doing great. But Splinter was like the perfect dad. He was like, I'll take the pain, whatever, but I'm not, you don't touch the kids. Like, this fight's between you and me. Danny, like, he just wanted to save everybody. He just wanted to be there to help everybody, but he didn't force it either. Like, he just presented his case, and I don't know. That's just a great dad.
Yeah. And, we've talked about the tie-ins between the Karate Kid, and he seems like a Miyagi figure in that he's a surrogate father, but also he has this, he doesn't fight much. It's like he prefers not to fight. Like, that's not the
Yeah.
way until he absolutely needs to, out of
Yeah.
self-defense. It's like a very similar Miyagi-esque philosophy. Matt Moore, thanks for being a channel member, Matt, says they straight up tortured Splinter. That wouldn't fly today. Rich, just talking about this movie in general, what other things in this movie just wouldn't fly today? Are there, do you watch this now and realize that, man, they just wouldn't do this today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think that, and I know this probably isn't exactly what he's talking about, but like, again, back in the 80s, I felt like you just had to have like, where's the love story? It was just like, it was like salt, like it's in every recipe, right? Or whatever. And so I don't think they would do that. I don't think you would need that today. Although Casey Jones and April O'Neil, like, historically have a relationship in the comic books, but I'm going to say I don't think you'd feel like you had to have it. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, they tortured Splinter, but I mean, I just saw Guardians of the Galaxy 3 recently, and no spoilers. But there's sometimes things get rough on movies. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything?
I think that there are some scenes, like we talked about Master Tatsu, and like there's a scene where Shredder just looks at him, obviously, like, you failed, you should be ashamed of yourself, and then he walks away. Then Master Tatsu, he just gets so angry, that he messed up, and he goes and he takes it out on the kids, and he just goes after him, and he just wails on him in the locker room, and to the point where one is on the floor and someone else checks his pulse. Like, they think that he could have died, like he could have killed him. And I'm just, psychologically, I think that's pretty dark. Like, it shows how bad Master Tatsu is. But I mean, I don't know if they would do that. Now, that just seems
not
like
in a movie
different
marketed to kids. I don't think. Yeah.
No. So Yeah, it felt very adult for a kids movie.
Yeah.
So as we kind of get towards the end of the movie, I don't know. We have the reveal of uh, Oroku Saki, who
Yeah.
is Shredder, his tie-in with Splinter, and I don't know. Give us a sense of like that entire fight sequence and how the Shredder character fulfill sort of the promise set up during the early part of the movie?
He is the bad guy based off just reputation and intimidation up till this point. And again, because the movie is different enough from what you know in the comics or the cartoons, that like you don't really know what to expect. But you know that you've seen Tatsu fight and you know that he's pretty great. So you think, okay, if Shredder is like better than him, he's probably, going to be this real badass guy. So I kind of love that they waited till just the end to see them take on the Shredder. And I love that the Turtles lose.
Yeah. Right, because they can't beat him.
Yeah. Yeah. If they had just beaten him in the fight, it wouldn't have had near as much emotion. Because I said, I believe, and I think I make a pretty good argument for it. This movie is really about the dichotomy between Splinter and Shredder, which is funny now that I think about it. Because if you shred something, you might have splinters. Interesting. Anyway, it's like I've never put those together before. Anyway, but the fact that the Turtles can't beat him because he's just that good, and he is so slick that you can go, oh, I get why he can train all these fighters. I get why he can train Tatsu because he is amazing. And then, of course, I the one thing I wish is that him and Splinter had more of a fight, but I'll take what I can get.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, because we talked about what the movies were like back then and the movies are like today. I bet today there would be more of a fight. Like you'd see more of a fight.
Probably, yeah.
How did they do it back then? I guess they were limited maybe by Splinter's puppetry, and what they could do. But what about that confrontation do you think is successful? For instance, I feel like if they showed that fight today, they'd show too much of it. They'd show Splinter maybe doing too much. But I don't know. What do you think was very unique about that confrontation that worked so well in 1990?
I think it works really well still to this day. And I think the thing that works well about it is that the Shredder is clearly a superior fighter, right? He is stronger, taller, faster. He's you're not going to beat him. But the reason he loses isn't because Splinter's a better fighter, which maybe we'll never know because we don't see it. But the reason he loses is because of his temper. Because he can't, like, he seems like this controlled guy this whole movie. Does he barely move? Someone takes his cape off of him, right? Even when he finds the drawing on Danny, he doesn't move that much. He just kind of puts his hand up here and then just kind of goes down and then grabs it. And like that's the most movement you really see from him until this fight when he is lightning fast. And so, you see him just like so angry and he unhinges. And that's what is his ultimate downfall, is not his fighting ability, it's his emotions.
Right. And we see Splinter whip out the nunchucks. He swings, Shredder swings over the top and he's hanging off on the side of the building, and he takes the knife out and he throws it at Splinter, but that is his downfall. Causes him to fall, actually literally down to the garbage truck. That whole thing, how did that his end, we know it's not quite his end, but in the movie, that's a hell of a way to go out with Casey Jones, which was, I remember, really funny, going oops, and the trash compactor goes down, but that's pretty dark. What were your thoughts of that sequence?
Well, first I'll say that the one thing they do show us is that Splinter is very fast because he literally catches the knife. And that's the reason the Shredder falls, but like catches it kind of with no problem. Doesn't seem like he's even putting effort into it. And then like seeing him in a trash compactor, and then Casey Jones is a psychopath. Like I didn't think about it as a kid, but like as an adult, I'm like, that man just crushed a man without with a joke.
Right.
Not even with remorse, like, hey, we have to do this. He's so bad, we have to do this. No, just like, oops, doodle.
Yeah, I know when I watched this again, in preparation for this review, I thought that same thing. I'm like, this is pretty dark. He just like
Yeah.
happily crushes another human. But as a kid, of course, you're right. It all makes sense. Alan says Casey Jones saying, "Who's the broad?" in reference to April. That would not fly. Matt Moore says, "Oh, I remember hating that one."
Danny.
Oh yeah, Danny, exactly.
Just
And then
mentioning
Jan
him.
says all the fight scenes involving weapons wouldn't fly today. To be honest, some parents might feel sensitive to that, and they did at the time. It was a big backlash from parents that changed the future sequels. Ninja Turtles 2, pretty much I don't think they used the weapons. There might have been one point in the movie where they actually used the weapons in a fight, but otherwise they didn't, which
Yeah, they use a
kind of
lot of like makeshift weapons out of the environment and stuff in the second one.
right.
But yeah, the second one, like, to me, this is a movie, a piece of cinema, a piece of literature that holds up to this day. The second one isn't bad; it's got some fun stuff in it, but I mean, it feels more like a fun kids movie as opposed to like I want to rewatch this all the time.
Right, right. I know it's like it's targeted more to that audience and perhaps a bit less timeless, if that makes sense.
I would
Like
say so. Yeah, not as
yeah,
classic. Yeah, 100%.
right.
And then what do you think about the ending word?
Cowabunga? Yeah. That like that whole sequence. Well, that was great. And to me, it brings it all back to the fact that everything's built on like character-based humor, lots of gags, and of course that's cowabunga is the huge word that everyone knew from watching the television series. It was like this new word, and it was great that we had that. And then Splinter saying, "Oh, I made a funny."
I made a funny. Yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty funny. Jan Mont says cowabunga.
Heck yeah.
But I just loved how everything got back to humor. It was very dark in tone, but through it all, there was humor.
Yeah.
The turtles, even though they were down, um, going back to the farm scene, Raphael, he wakes up, and they're worried about him, and he says, "Hey, what's a guy got to do to get some food
Get some
around
food
here?"
around here. Yeah.
I love that attitude of like through adversity, there you always have to have a sense of humor. Like that's what gets you through. And so I love how the movie ended that way.
I think that's one reason why we love like Spider-Man and like there's other characters that just like humor is just a necessary part of who the turtles are. I mean, their name is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like if they get too dark, it's gonna be a little silly.
Right. Exactly. And Brian Fishback, who's been on KenCast, brings up that alphabet game Casey and Mikey play. Here goes Gack Face. And they do
fish breath.
Fish breath. That's really fantastic.
I don't mean to contradict, but my memory is that is Donatello. Are we sure?
Actually, I think you're right, Rich. It is Donatello. Because I think she was drawing Donatello, and they had that kind of antagonistic relationship when Donatello has no problem saying, "Hey, you're a claustrophobic," and, and then back. It's interesting. It's like of the time, and Casey says, "Hey, you never even looked at another guy before," just like all that kind of stuff. But they had that kind of sort of antagonistic relationship. And okay, so let's go back. So we've kind of covered this movie, and I definitely want to get your overall thoughts if we missed anything.
Oh, yeah.
But looking at this from a 1990 kid's perspective, what was your review? Did it fulfill what you wanted? What are your thoughts?
You know what I loved about this movie the most as a kid is that it didn't give me what I wanted. It gave me something I didn't know I wanted. I was way more a fan of the cartoon show and the toys than the comic book. So I didn't really think about putting the comic book. I thought when they make a movie, oh, they're making a cartoon. They're turning the cartoon into a movie. And even if that's live action, it's still going to be in the spirit of, it's probably going to have the same music, the same voices, anything like that. Kind of like the Transformers, when their movie, they use a lot of the same things of that nature. Then some celebrity voices that didn't work, but that's a whole nother podcast. But the they gave me something that I didn't know I wanted, that I fell in love with more than the reason that got me there in the first place.
That is a great point. Now, hang on to that. Now, let me put you in a time machine and take you to 2023. You're an adult looking at this now. How does this movie hold up in 2023?
It clearly holds up. I mean, if anyone's reading the chat, people know this movie as well as I do. They know every line, every word. And there's several movies I used to know every word of that I've lost because I don't care. But this is one of two movies that I will rewatch every year at least once, without a doubt. And because I still enjoy it. I don't do it just because I got to keep up my fandom. I do it because I still love this. And I think it clearly still speaks to a lot of other people. I've seen screenings of this movie at different theaters and it always is a huge turnout. People love it. I mean, I don't know, you rewatch it for this, but is this a movie that's in your rewatch catalog at all? That kind of thing?
It is. I probably rewatch it maybe once every 5 years or so. And
yeah. That's huge. That's huge. How many? Yeah. Not many movies do that.
No, and I'm tempted to say, obviously, the tastes of the movie-going public change. I think we seem to be in a phase now where popular movies, in my opinion, tend to be a bit overlong. The fight sequences can be a bit bloated. They're not pushing the story, as you're talking about, similar to musicals. Those fight scenes, I don't think are pushing the story or aren't as interesting. But those movies tend to be a bit overlong. And so I think by modern tastes, it's possible that this movie, it might be too quick, over and done with, maybe light on the story details. There's a story there, but I'm wondering if now, according to current tastes, if it might be too quick, which is possible. But the thing is, my preference has always been, and maybe because I grew up during this period, is for movies to be tighter, for them to be shorter. And to me, it's with the fight scenes and the humor, everything's tight. It keeps moving. It has that energy. It doesn't sag. And so I think in the long run, this movie will continue to live on through the decades, I hope, for that very reason, that it's paced well. It has that great humor. And I'm with you, Rich. I hope that the suits in this movie continue to be accepted by future generations. I don't know, maybe people in the comments can let us know if kids are about the suits, if they work. But it's amazing, I think, what they did with martial arts, not only the performances, the physical performances, the performances of the puppetry, as you said, just the empathy you have for them based on their performances, but the martial arts sequences, they were able to do these fight scenes. I don't know how they did that in these things. I kind of hope someday, Rich, with future Ninja Turtles movies, they try to do these types of suits again. I can just imagine just the technology now, where they're not CG, but they're real.
I don't hate Michael Bay. There's a lot of Michael Bay movies I actually really like, but his take on the Turtles felt like he was punching me right in the face. He was just Rich, you want to hate yourself? I was I went to that movie going, I know it's not going to be as good as the original, but it'll still be good to see the Turtles. No, it was terrible. It was terrible. And the Turtles are great. Some, people invoked a couple of other movies that I haven't seen all the iterations of the Turtles, but I have seen some. And as I said, that Batman versus TMNT is really great. Someone brought up the video games, a lot of great classic video games, the Turtles for the arcade, the Nintendo game, all that stuff.
Right. I know. And that's a whole other thing too. This world has gotten huge. And I think, I was into those video games, the Nintendo games, the arcade games. It all seemed to flow along nicely. I think, it seemed like those arcade games seem to be based more on the TV show, which makes sense.
Yeah.
I really, I if there's one thing that I feel, I guess, bad about is the fact that nothing's really followed in the tone of this movie. I don't think. Like it
No,
doesn't seem like whether it's I could be wrong because I've kind of stepped away from it. Like I saw the first three in the theaters. Um, I didn't see TMNT, which I guess was supposed to be kind of a part four.
I thought it was
Um,
fun. It was fun.
what yeah, so did you think so I we could do separate podcasts on each of these movies. Maybe Rich,
Sure.
you'd like to.
As much
I
as
think
you
it'd be
want, man.
very interesting to dive deep into, and guys, let us know if you'd like to see more. But
Yeah.
kind of if you give us kind of an overview, what were your thoughts on the other movies that you've seen?
Well, as I said, the second one, again, I don't have any hate for it, but I mean, it does feel like a step down in quality a little bit. It steps more like a children's movie than a piece of cinema. The third one, I don't really remember. I saw it in the theaters. I didn't like it, and I never rewatched it. TMNT, the animated feature film from I want to say 2006 something. I could be way off on that. Maybe 10. I don't know, but it was good. It was fun. It was definitely a different take on it. There was magic and different things of that nature. So it was definitely more. As I said, this movie, even though they're Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, feels real. Whereas
Right.
that movie wasn't intended to, but it's still a lovely film. And Ian McKellen is like in it, and I believe April is played by Buffy, whose name's escaping, but
Oh, Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Sarah Michelle Gellar, and I think a few other cool voices in it. But I like it. I've rewatched it a couple of times. It's definitely up there. As I said, Batman versus TMT, great. There was a TMT movie that came out like a year or two ago that my friend told me about. I still haven't seen yet. That everyone tells me is really awesome. And then of course the new one that either just came out or is about to. I haven't seen that one yet either.
I haven't seen it either. I've heard lots of good things. Drew Rohali, who's on KenCast sometimes, he said he loved it. I think Al, you said you saw it with Emmett, and so that's cool. I'm looking forward to checking that out. It looks different. It's like a different conception, maybe different characterization of the turtles, which is cool. I love
Yeah.
the idea that. But man, there's something about this movie that they nailed, and I'm
Yep.
kind of surprised that it almost seemed like a one-off, and no one was interested in trying to follow in this movie's footsteps.
Yeah, and I'm grateful we got it. There was a million reasons this movie shouldn't have been made. The script had problems. They went through a bunch of directors. There was a bunch of distributors that didn't want it. The budget was problems. There were shooting problems. I mean, there was there's a lot of good movies like this that just it's insane that it got made, but I'm just so grateful for it. Like it is such a defining piece of pop culture for me. And allows us to talk about it today, and like Three Ninjas. Oh yeah, Jess, I love Three Ninjas. I watched the heck out of that movie.
Right.
Yeah, it was more kids, 100%, but yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Fake Terry Silver. That's what I thought when I saw Three Ninjas. I was like, this guy's kind of like the Terry Silver, but not as good.
They had to have been thinking of Terry Silver, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
And I've had some people on the live stream who have said that Terry Silver would make an amazing Ninja Turtle enemy, and I kind of agree. Somehow he would fit.
I'd
think
love to see that crossover. Look, if TMNT and Karate Kid universes ever want to cross over, take my money.
Yep, I totally agree, and I think that would be my suggestion. I want to get your suggestion to the universe, or maybe to the studios who make these movies, of what you'd like in Ninja Turtle content going forward. But I would love a return to the tone of this movie. I love it. I'd love to see someday another movie try to do the suits. I'd love the actual real martial arts sequences. As Rich, as you were saying, that is, photographed very well. We have a sense of space. We get to see these very talented stunts. Gosh, I'd love to see stunts again. No CG, and at the very least, maybe a new remaster of this movie, like a 4K remaster, and maybe even a cut. Like if there's a longer cut of this movie,
or director's
maybe
cut or something. Yeah, 100%. Yes. That would be great. I'd be all for that.
Well, Rich, do you have like any sort of thoughts to wrap up this movie to people who have seen it or haven't seen it?
I mean, I can talk about it forever, but I will say I believe it was Sam Rockwell's first movie, and almost no one who isn't a hardcore fan realizes that he was even in it because he's just a smaller part, but an important part. But yeah, and he would go on to be an Oscar winner, so it's like you're welcome, Sam Rockwell, for this movie happening. He would have been fine. He's a very talented boy. But I want to shout out Kevin Clash. Not that he needs me to. He's doing great, but the man has spent almost his entire career being Elmo and or other puppets for like 5 and under kind of age children. But he crushes Splinter so hard. There's so much heart in that voice that and I know that any actor can be talented even if they aren't known for something, but it is just so cool to where this guy goes, I'm Elmo, and then, oh, you want me to really just do this iconic character better than anyone's ever done it? No problem.
100% agree with that. He was amazing, and as you said, he brought tears to our eyes. Still does with that performance. And maybe you put your finger on what makes this so special is Jim Henson's team, including Kevin Clash, all the puppets, and just their decades of experience in getting these amazing, sincere performances through puppetry. And I think that's something this movie is so innovative with. And I don't know if we've seen it like that since. It was really, I think, a very special time.
I don't hate CGI. I really don't. I think CGI, when we were on the Nostalgia Market, I'm talking about Terminator 2, like that CGI was great. It served the story. But when you can put a real effect in instead of CGI, I think it's always better. And I think these suits and the fighting done in these suits and the weapons and all this stuff made this movie that timeless feel that we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, 100% agree. And it just makes us buy into this world, the reality of this world. And I see Stripe the Warrior. He quotes, "You fight well in the old style."
The old style.
Go ahead, Rich.
But you've caused me enough trouble. Now you face the warrior.
Stripe the Warrior.
The Shredder.
Well,
yeah.
See, like this whole movie's
you can recite it.
Oh yeah, I can still, yeah. I don't mean to brag, but I'm a 42-year-old man that still knows every word to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
There's nothing wrong with that, Rich. In fact, it makes me admire you. I just want to
God bless you, sir. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. And if you're into it, you mentioned games, Rich. Stripe says Shredder's Revenge DLC is coming out, by the way. Maybe get to play a Shredder. Wow, very cool. Very cool.
I didn't know about that. You were talking about like movies you wish you could see. You know what? I've never seen an iteration. I'm sure they have it in comic books or something, but I'd love to see a movie of it. Is the origin story in Japan?
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, Saki and Hamato Yoshi and the rat and the love interest whose name I can't remember. Yeah, but all that.
I think that would be fantastic. Yeah, it's a great world. It's an amazing story. I hope they explore that. And in the meantime, Rich, I guess we have to do our homework and see the new movie sometime.
I'm on board. Let's do it.
Okay, that's great. Well, Rich, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I've just learned so much listening to you and your perspective on this movie, and I think our review today shows why it's considered a classic by many of our generation. So
thank you so much, Ken. I love talking about this movie and I love talking with you. So this is heaven.
Likewise. And everyone who joined us today in the live chat, thank you so much. It's great to hear your thoughts. If you're watching this on the replay, let us know what you think down in the comments, and those comments are forever. So we'll get to see those and we'll read those. And thank you for watching KenCast. Be sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything going forward. If you want Rich and I to talk about the sequels, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 and 3, let us know. Maybe we'll do that. So thank you so much. And to everyone listening on the audio version, thank you as well. We look forward to seeing you next time in KenCast, and we hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Want to be part of the live KenCast show? Subscribe to the Ken Cole YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to get alerts about every new show. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time on KenCast.